Good morning and a warm welcome to this panel discussion on accredited skills, accredited qualifications or certified skills, the way forward. If any of you would like to participate in the global discussion on GSF, you can participate it through Twitter. The hashtag is #GSF. So please feel free to post your comments on this. So we are here to discuss accredited qualifications or certified skills. And I think there are two aspects to this that we will look at through our panel members here today. One is from the demand side of this, and the second is to the supply side of this. When you look at, let me take two examples of the demand side. I'll take an example of a company in India, which the IT companies in India, and number two is the hospitality companies in Africa. Both of the places I have worked in. So IT companies in India pick up qualified engineers from universities, put them through an extensive 3 to 6 months program within their own campuses, and then deploy them in the actual workplace. So there's a lead time of anywhere between 3 to 6 months from the time they hire someone to actually putting them on the job. Similarly, if you take a five-star hotel in somewhere in Africa, again they would take a qualified hospitality graduate from a local institution, again put them through a 3 to 6 months program, and then an internship, and then get them to do their jobs. So the question here is that when they have picked up an accredited qualified graduate or a diploma holder, why do they need to still put them through a 3 to 6 months program? And what about the costs and lead times associated with this process? So that's one aspect of it. The second side of it is from the supply side, where both governments and institutions are aggressively looking at frameworks, qualifications frameworks, accredited qualifications, processes of accreditation. And both institutions as well as students are running behind qualifications which are accredited. So they are missing the critical component of skills which are today required by the workplace. So both these aspects, as you can see, has led to a fairly substantial gap in terms of what industry requires and what's currently out there today. So, and I think at the core of this is this debate on what do we need to stress on. Do we need to continue to stress on accredited qualifications, or do we need to look at how we need to include skills and a process of recognizing those skills at an international level into the way we qualify people. So that's what we're here to discuss. But as a practice that you must have seen through yesterday as well, to look at what's the innovation that's happening on the ground and how head teachers and teachers are driving this innovation on the ground. We have with us a star innovator, and our gentleman here is from Uganda, my neighbor in Africa. So let me welcome Mathias to come and speak to us. Please join me in welcoming him.
Good morning to everyone. My name is Cayenne Mathias, and I'm a teacher in Eden College. It's a privilege to be here in Dubai representing teachers from Uganda, but not only Uganda, but across the world, working as I am to be a change teacher maker. I work as a teacher I work as a teacher in a country where there are many challenges that include large class sizes, teacher shortages, lack of focus on the learning outcomes. But like many other teachers, I want to change, and I believe that I can contribute to this change by innovating in my own school. So to keep focus on the ground realities and the importance of teachers being part of the solutions to education reform. I would like to share one of the ideas from one of our teacher colleague by the names of Oyam. And in his education community, there was a challenge where there is I'll call it policy innovation versus policy implementation, where the government came into a policy that students should, at a lower level, that's primary level, should be taught in their local languages. And by this, the government had not provided textbooks for the learners, for the teachers to facilitate learning. So what did he do? He came up with the innovation of improvising materials by getting charts, drawing some of the illustrations, and naming them in their local language to ease the learning and teaching process for the learners. And then these students and the learners actually they learn easily when they learn from known to unknown, basing on their own mother tongue. And this would say it's not all that has been solved, but I believe with this micro innovation, it has played part in answering some of the challenges that are in education systems and communities. Thank you very much and enjoy the panel discussions.
Thank you so much, Mathias. I think it's very important to remember that where there is necessity, innovation follows. And I think as we get into the panel discussion, this is something that we need to realize, that this is no longer the debate on whether qualifications are, the accredited qualifications are more important or skills is no longer a matter of discussion. It is extremely urgent out there. So we desperately need to act. And with that, let me introduce my panel to you. I have with me on my left Honorable Albert, who is the Minister of State for Technical and Vocational Education and Training from Rwanda. Alongside him is Sue Parker, who is the Director of Skills for GEMS Education. Next to her is Mr. Frank Ireri, who is the Managing Director of Housing Finance from my home country, Kenya. And next is Ms. Anna, who is here with us from Moldova. I will request each of the speakers, starting with Albert, to give their opening remarks and give a little more introduction about themselves. So, Albert.
Thank you, Master Sir, Moderator. First of all, I think the theme that we're discussing today is so critical. It's so critical not only even to Africa, but for most of the places in the world, because I believe skills development in many of our countries is a dynamic, element, particularly because we are talking about linking skills with the labor market. As the labor market keeps changing and the demand is becoming more and more sophisticated, we need to design training that meet the various changes that we see in our labor market. So in particular, the linkage between labor market and supply is a challenge in itself. I think you raise a very important point. How do you make sure that the qualification that, because we are more concerned as a supply on more qualifications, while the labor market is more concerned on skills. So how do you match those two? I think that's really where the question is. And here we took the two examples that I feel we need to consider. Let me pick an example of Germany, because I know a bit the system. In Germany, probably because of the history of the country, this is really an industrialized country for many years, they've managed to integrate skills, particularly practical skills, that meet labor market through what they call a dual system. And the dual system allows a student while at school to also spend some time in industry. Just to respond to the question that you're raising, why do we have to train people after they graduate? So in Germany, that's how they do. But I was telling my colleagues from Germany that the model itself, it's so hard to replicate in a number of countries just because the environment is totally different. So how do we learn from this model to make sure that we're maximizing chances of providing exposure to our students while at school, knowing that in most of our countries, one, the private sector is too small. Second, it is not prepared because in Germany, the advantage that they have very strong chambers. And the chambers are the one owning actually education. So they are not only on the demand, but they're also very much involved in the planning of skills, which is, I think, is so critical. So in the case of Rwanda, as we learn from others, we've managed to establish what we call we call them Sector Skills Council. And Sector Skills Council are made up by representatives from private sector and, of course, the public. They are the one advising the supply side from curriculum design to make sure that the curriculum take into consideration the requirements from the labor market. They also advise in terms of industrial attachment how best we can actually improve that. And they will definitely be very important to make sure that as we design a qualification framework, they play their part so that we can match qualification and skills. Of course, this is really a new undertaking. It may take some time to bring everyone on board, but I think this is the way to go. We definitely need to consider timing. We don't want our kids to spend some time at school and then once they graduate, they go again for another training. The cost and time is so critical. So to me, that's what I want to share at this point. Thank you.
So,
thank you. Sorry, excuse me. I'd like to pick up one or two of those points because I think they are incredibly valid and valuable. And in particular, to just very briefly talk about qualification frameworks. Qualification frameworks are about 130 of them around the world now. And when a nation decides very often that it wishes to look at its qualifications and upgrade them, they immediately think, qualification framework, excellent idea. Now, of course, the real problem is that all we're doing all the time is tending to reinvent the wheel. And so many of these qualification frameworks, which are designed in some cases to articulate academic, vocational, and skills-based qualifications within the same structure, really become structures driven by government. If they do not include, as my colleague next to me says, that input of employers, that input of driving standards through what employers actually want, they become totally meaningless. And I have seen this because I've worked with a number across the world, that they become an entity in their own right and do not become anything to do with the workplace or indeed really with what schools, young people, or indeed those in the workplace actually require. So that's my first point. Yes, qualification frameworks, great idea, but let's think about what they're there for and who drives them. The second point is around the whole business around employer-driven. I actually think that in too many nations, and I'm not talking about the two nations here, but in many nations, policy is driven by government providers, universities. And government kind of wanders along, employers are kind of asked at some point, what do you think? Rather than actually driving the policy. I think increasingly, the relationship between government and employers needs to change. Employers need to have a much greater hand in helping government to derive their strategies, both for school qualifications and for skill-based. Without that, we are always going to end up with qualifications that by the time they've been accredited, and sometimes it can take 2 to 3 years to accredit them, are completely and utterly out of date, totally out of sync with what the labour market actually needs. By the time the teachers are trained, they're probably 4 years out of date. So by the time the children come out of school or college or university, they're probably 6 to 8 or even 10 years out of date. And we are miles behind. There's this massive mismatch between what we're providing in our schools, in our colleges, and our universities, and what the labour market demands. And I think what we need to explore much more internationally is the whole of the kind of flexible apprenticeship kind of framework, where young people from a much earlier age in schools start to work on some of the practical applications that they may need in future industries, not just in the industries of yesterday and today, to enable them to start understanding the skills they may need, the attitudes and the competences they need in the workplace, as well as the knowledge they need. My personal view is that the knowledge that people who are good skills experts, the most highly skilled people, are not the ones, as we so often box them, the less able. They are the ones that are really able because they can take the knowledge and they can apply it in a workplace context.
Two important points have been raised so far, besides other things. I think one, Albert talked about sector skills councils, and I think that is something that we'll discuss a little more as we go along. And what is a validity, or what is it that they bring on the table? Sue mentioned a very critical point about qualifications frameworks and everything associated with it driven by government, and the participation or the involvement of the labor market in it, which is actually the consumer of skills and qualifications. So I think we'll come back to these 2 points as we go along. Frank, your opening remarks.
Yeah, great, thank you. Frank Kirari, Housing Finance Company of Kenya Limited, one of the leading finance players in the building and construction industry in Kenya. As a country, Kenya has embarked on an ambitious vision to transform the country into a middle-income country by 2030. To achieve that, there are a lot of infrastructure projects that have been identified. Now, as an organization, one thing that we did realize that is missing in the whole setup is the whole area of technically skilled artisans, the real workers who will be involved in these various projects. So what we've embarked on is a vision to create an army of 1 million artisans during this period. Now, to do this, we realized that the sort of qualifications and the sort of curriculum content that is being taught in the various polytechnics and technical and vocational colleges really is not relevant to today's needs of the industry. So what we're advocating for is competency-based curriculum that is informed and certified by industry. And to do this, we'll be kicking it off actually this coming Friday in Nairobi with a workshop that brings together both government, who of course are a very key player, industry, and the practitioners to achieve this. Thank you.
My name is Anna Susarenko and I am from Moldova, a small country from Eastern Europe. And I'm here as part of Youth Advocacy Group, which is a part of Global Education First initiative. And I should recognize that I feel privileged to be here, to speak in front of you. While a lot of my peers did never went to school, or they went to school, but they are not able to speak in English due to the quality of education. Or they graduated, but are unemployed, and they are feeling excluded from society. Millions of young people that participated in the post-2015 consultations. 6,000 young people that participated in drafting and writing the youth resolutions on education that have been presented by 500 young people in person at the UN headquarters this summer. All of them are asking for education. All of them see education as a priority. But we should understand that if this will not have clear links with the employment, youth will struggle to see the education and value of education as a priority for their career. I'd like you to think about skills and qualifications, and I'd like you to stand up for a few seconds. If your job is directly related to the education that you receive, please sit down. Thank you very much.
Well done.
I think that majority of us do not have a job that is directly related to the education that they receive. But almost all of us have a job. So that means that we gain some skills from the education. And I don't agree that formal education is unnecessary or is not valued. I just think that we need to adapt the curricula. We need to think about both theoretical and practical skills. Young people today are looking for different skills. They need cross-cultural skills because borders are moving. They need technological and scientific skills because of innovation. They need life skills because they need to have a healthy life. The mix of skills is diverse. And this involves that we are able to adapt and change in the communities and international areas. I'm here today, and I speak in front of you because I went to school, because I know how to read and how to write, because I'm able to analyze, compare, and present. But 57 million of children of primary age are not in school. 215 million are in school, but they are not learning. And we have 700 million of adults that cannot read and write. These are not new numbers for you, but this is about the basic needs of literacy in the world. First, we need knowledge. Then we need skills. And then we need qualifications. Without a diploma in my region, it will be very difficult to find a decent job. This is the only way that we can go forward, to have both qualifications and skills, but to have them interconnected, to have qualifications that speak about the skills that we have, to have the education that grew up both employees but also employers. And you'll tell me that we know all of this, but what is the solution? I'll tell you. Use energy of young people, involve them, put them on the table, discuss with them. Changes already happen, and we are very happy to be here, to participate and speak in almost every panel. But we need youth involved in a systematic way. We need them involved at the community level, at the grassroots level. We need them involved in the national policy. This is the only way that we can help them to understand, but also they will help us, or will help you, to take the right decisions, to make education relevant to the employment and to the job market. Thank you.
So, Frank has given us an example of what they are doing in Kenya, and it led by the private sector on bringing a competency-based curriculum into mainstream education, so that the industry demands could be met. While Anna has also raised a very significant point about children and why is it that they aspire for education. Because I think we all need to understand that a lot of hope rides on education. Children want to get into education because they see that it will transform their lives. They'll be able to earn, stand up on their own feet, and take care of their families. So, and when that doesn't happen, after a process of going through something and getting a qualification, then the frustration levels can be immense. And I think I'm sure my colleagues from Africa will agree with me that it's a significant problem today in Africa, where we have a lot of qualified youth who have certificates, but who are not able to participate in the labor market because they're simply lacking skills. So let's debate this a bit. Sue, my question first is to you. Albert mentioned about sector skill councils. So do you think that's an answer, or is it part of an answer?
I think it's part of an answer, and I think, again, it depends very much on the country in which you're working. Where employers want to be involved, where employers are already quite heavily involved, or where there are good employer structures, bringing them together into some kind of framework, whether it be sector skills councils, advisory bodies, or whatever it may be, is right. They are the ones that understand what the occupations of today are and have a clue about some of the occupations of the future. The real problem is occasionally they're thinking more about today than maybe 5 years' time, and that's where I think having young people involved is actually very important. So yes, I do think that sector skills councils are certainly part of the solution. I don't think they are the only part of the solution, but without them, or something that purports them, like some kind of employer advisory relationship, in industry bodies or whatever they might be, without them we won't get very far. I also think they have an additional part to play, in so much as sometimes what we really need is not that necessarily that certificate from something they've done in the past, but also a recognition of what people can do today in the workplace. And that's also where I think employers have an incredibly important role to play. It's that recognition of our current experience, prior experience, which may be a different kind of certificate, but actually tells you what you can do, not what you might be able to do.
Now, extending that discussion on Sector Skills Council a little further. Do you think it takes a long time? I mean, my question to you, this is to you, Albert, where the need is right now. I mean, there are youth who are already there right now who are unemployed. Industry wants it right now. I mean, tomorrow morning. But the process of creating sector skill councils, they debating and they establishing certain things takes an enormous amount of time because it's entirely led by government. So, do you think that's an issue? I mean, do we need to have a process where it's speeded up?
I agree with you. And I'm picking from what, as you said, to make or to put in place a sector skill council it's partially a very important milestone, but in the end, it is what they are going to do that matter, and particularly their buy-in. And here I'm talking about the private sector in particular, because I think we still have a challenge, particularly in some of the critical sectors, including construction, to make sure that the employers involved understand that they have to be part of the solution. They have to participate in building the skills that we are looking for. In many cases, you find that that particular task is left to government. Of course, government is a very important player, but government cannot do everything. Government will support, will facilitate, but we believe the buy-in comes first from the private sector. So there's a lot of things to do, there's a lot of encouragement to put in place to make sure that the private sector get the buy-in. And as you correctly said, as we do that, we understand time is not really on our side. I was just looking at, we have an institution responsible for promoting investment. I was looking at major projects that are coming out that may need skills that are not available now. So what mechanisms do you put in place as we discuss, as we form the sector skills? Those skills are also being developed, they're being prepared. That's a big challenge. It's a huge challenge. And that's why I feel having private sector involved in skills become very important. And that's where I see innovation coming from. Innovation will never come from government. Innovation comes from people, from private sector, to help advance in terms of making sure that the skill that we need, even the skill of tomorrow, are being built today. It's quite a big challenge.
Anna, my question is to you now is, do you sometimes feel that the student is left out of this? Because there is a government which is trying to create frameworks, there is an industry which is trying to determine what needs to be done, but has anybody bothered to ask the student as to what he wants? Does he want to go through a 15 years of education to get employment? Or does he prefer other mechanisms of acquiring skills and getting employed? So do you think there is a dialogue that is happening with the youth?
Thank you for the question. Actually, I said in my notes at the beginning, and I will repeat that I think that the best solution for everything is communication. When we will start to communicate with these students, with these young people that today are already studying and tomorrow they'll need a job, or they are already in the job market and not able to find a job, when we will start to listen to them, to ask them what they think, that time we will take the right decisions. Because many times we feel that our decision makers do not have time to listen, and they are in a hurry to take decisions. And then we realize that it's not the decision that young people need, it's not the decision that we can use. So I'll say that we need to communicate, and we need to start it today. We don't have time to wait. We have already the young people that suffer of the lack of communication, of the lack of being listening. So we need to listen them, we need to consult them, and we need to involve them, to help them to understand the process, not just to invite them to participate, but to help them to understand the whole process of changing things. Thank you.
And I think I hear what you're saying because, I started my career as a salesperson, and I did that after 18 years of education and XYZ number of qualifications. So I always wondered if I had to become a sales guy at the end of it, though I needed 18 years of hard work and qualifications. So I think you are raising a very important point. I think the involvement of youth, I think, is completely missing from the component of this dialogue. Frank, now the minister talked about the necessity of the private sector to play a much more active role. Do you think there is an intent issue on the private sector, or is there an operational mechanism which is missing for you to participate?
Sorry, is there what?
An operational mechanism through which you can participate in this process of establishing frameworks and
Yes.
qualifications.
Yes, definitely there is, and of course it needs a proactive approach from the private sector. At least from our experiences in Kenya, the government is very willing to engage and has very much welcomed our involvement, especially in setting up this curriculum. So yes, there is.
Now, Albert, what are the best practices that you have seen around the world and within Rwanda about how qualifications have been defined? What mechanisms have been used? Which are the stakeholders which have been involved to look at qualification frameworks? Mm-hmm. So, once Albert answers, I would also like you to pick this up. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I think one of the challenges we see in many African countries, because this modular system, competency-based curriculum, this is just the beginning. Yeah, in many countries, we still have a knowledge-based curriculum, and the shift is so critical, but it will take some time. It's not, because now we are looking at developing skills by trade, which make actually the number of curriculum we're looking for quite a big. In some cases, we may not need even to design them. We need to import them, and then we adapt accordingly. But more critically, when I look around, number of countries that have been engaged into developing vocational skills-based qualification framework, we pick different models. For example, in our case, we learn from the qualification framework from Australia. Australia is known to have a very good qualification framework. We also learned from South Africa as well. They did one, but for some reason it didn't work out. Because I think one of the things you need to make sure that is to try as much as possible to make it simple. If you try to make it more complicated, then it becomes very difficult to implement it. And what I was speaking from too is that having a framework is one thing, but making sure that you consider the involvement of the private sector, because the private sector will have to design occupation. And once you come up with occupation, then you need to align occupation with qualification and a number of other things that are needed to make sure that your qualification framework is easy to implement. I think that's where the question is. And of course, once the qualification framework is in place, you need to review it on a regular basis, because as we said, labor market keeps changing. There are new occupation coming on board, there are new trade coming. So you really have to make sure that you review it, and you also have to do something very critical, because we're just looking at the qualification framework that touch on vocational, but you need also a national qualification framework that look into other form of education that you provide, because we try to make education as flexible as possible. In some cases, I remember when we had a one-year vocational program that ends, and there's no possibility for one to go vertical. So we definitely need to make some level of flexibility, including training that are taking place in the industry. How do you capture those training in the qualification framework? That become also very critical. So I think most of places, this is just the beginning. We haven't seen much coming out of it, and there's going to be a lot of work to do in that perspective.
Okay.
I'm actually qualifications agnostic in some respects. Sorry, qualifications framework agnostic in some ways. Some of the frameworks around about work quite well because they were set up with a very specific purpose in mind. If I take the example of my own country, the UK, we actually have 5 different qualification frameworks. And so that makes it all rather bizarre, frankly. So there are 2 points I want to make here. First of all, one of the things that happens increasingly is actually looking at higher level than just an individual national qualifications framework, but at a meta framework to try and see how things articulate between different countries based on competences at different levels. And I think that's actually quite useful. There is a European qualifications framework, because if you think about it, mobility of labour is an incredibly important part, and therefore skills mobility is an incredibly important aspect of what we need to be looking at. So I think meta frameworks, where you look at some of the higher level competences, are maybe the way forward. I know that UNESCO is also looking at skills and competency frameworks for different parts of the world. And I think that is actually a very sensible way forward. So, for example, they're starting to develop one for the Asia-Pacific region, which will allow somebody from the Philippines to be able to articulate their skills fairly readily with someone from, say, Australia or indeed from Thailand. That's the first point. But the second point, which I want to make, is around, and I think Albert alluded to it, is around sector-specific frameworks. And there's a very interesting development starting to emerge. There is an oil and gas framework which is being developed by APITO, which is the oil and gas standard-setting body. And this is being developed purely by the employers, looking at what they need at different levels of competency for those who are operating on rigs or those that are operating in some of the more technical skills, right the way through to those that are developing robotics and all the various communication areas and such like. And I think that that too is a very valid and valuable way at looking at qualification frameworks. Providing that you can then look at some common levels, you can understand that somebody who wants to then move maybe from the oil and gas industry into engineering has got skills they can transfer. That, I think, is what is important. So that's why I say I'm qualification framework agnostic. The ones I really think are hopeless are the ones that, let's do a qualification framework. We haven't got a clue why we're going to do it. We're going to do it because the other 6 nations around us have got one, so let's do one. That's nonsense. But if you've got a very good reason for doing it, like you want to facilitate change, you want to put parity of esteem between academic and the old vocational qualifications, you want to see how they articulate to each other, that's fine. But increasingly, I think sector-specific ones may be another way forward.
So I think, Sue, you raised 2 important points from there, and I'd like to put this question to Frank from the industry. One is that the labor market today is global. I mean, you might be in Kenya, but you might be competing with companies from anywhere in the world. So similarly, the acquisition of skills or qualifications is again global. I mean, we have so many people from Africa or India who go everywhere else in the world and pick up qualifications from there and come back into their home countries and work. So when this is happening, do you think we need to invest again and again in every country in creating qualifications frameworks and in occupational standards? Why don't we simply adapt some of these things rather than reinventing the wheel all over again?
No, I fully agree with that. There's no need to reinvent the wheel, and definitely from a Kenya, Africa perspective, everything we're trying to do today has been done somewhere else. And so we can always borrow best practice and localize it to your own specific situation. I mean, Sue talked about the oil and gas, for example. Kenya has just discovered huge quantities of oil and gas. And definitely I expect now the authorities also to be looking around the world. There are very many successful examples, and pick those skills. Yeah.
Now, when you decide to join an institution, what is, do you think there is a complete quality assurance mechanism which is missing? I mean, how do people decide, except basis reputation, which is not quantitative but very subjective? How do you decide to join, an institution? Like in the financial market, you have a rating, a credit rating, So do you think a quality mechanism is missing in this space?
When you say institution, you mean like to go for a job, or also educational institutions?
Education, even for education.
Because I had already these discussions many times, and there is a saying that young people today are going to be all of them economists or lawyers, or I don't know, like they're having preferences for professions and not for others that are also necessary, especially for the industry. I'll say my answer will be one of the quote that we had in the first day at the opening ceremony on the big screen, and it's saying by Confucius that tell me and I'll forget, show me, I'll remember, involve me and I'll understand. When we will start to involve young people, they will understand the need that we need to have also lawyers and economists, but we need also to have engineers and industry workers. So we need to involve them in a whole process, to make them to understand the necessity of the job market, and to make them to take right decisions.
Okay. And I'd like the other panel members to also comment on this, from your own perspectives, what your views are on quality mechanisms for institutions which are delivering qualifications and skills.
If I was a lot younger than I am now, and I were going to go to university or go to an institution now, what I would be looking for is one where I could match my knowledge and apply it in the workplace. I'll give you a little tale. Some of you will have heard this, I'm sorry. When I went to see my careers teacher and I said, I want to be an engineer, she said to me, nice girls are not engineers. She said, I think if I were you, I'd be a social worker. Well, I'm here now, so I'm not quite sure what happened. But I think that's a very salutary tale that I wasn't listened to. I wanted to build bridges. I wanted to wear a hard hat. I also, to be quite honest with you, I wanted to go to university where I'd be the only woman in the department, but that's beside the point. But I would seriously be looking at something where I could feel that the things that I was really interested in, the things I really wanted to do, and the things that I wanted to make a difference in, that would be where I'd be looking. And I wouldn't care now if it was a top-end university or an employer. And I would probably look now, in my own particular case, to go into some form of higher apprenticeship, where maybe I had the option of going to some university or doing some university accredited programs, but I felt that I was able to get on in a quality way in the chosen area I wanted to be in.
Albert, yeah.
No, it's a very interesting topic, First of all, it also depends what we are looking for when we talk about quality. How do we define quality? Of course, there have to be quality standards in everything that, what we call a building blocks that you have in place, from the curriculum, the trainer, the environment, the learning outcomes. All these are things that you need to consider as you look into quality. But somebody was telling me, you see, in the end, you may go through all these put up standards, but don't getting right. So in the end, what I think is critical is to match, I think that's what the point she was making, is to match what the labor market needs. So you go in the labor market, you see what a carpenter is doing, if you actually respond to the needs of the company, and you say, he or she has gone through a training that was quality oriented. It's as simple as that. Otherwise, we make it too complicated and it's very difficult to make. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, I agree with Albert. And I think quality is really around acceptability and recognition, let's say by the employers, by the investors, and for those seeking maybe to work beyond their countries, again by those markets.
So what you're all saying is primarily that quality is, as long as it meets standards that are created with the participation of the labor market, that is quality.
The relevance.
Okay. Yeah, because already it is relevant
Yeah.
since the labor market has participated. Okay, I think we're a little short on time, so I'll just come down to my final point as to what do we really mean by skills? I mean, and what's currently lacking in the current frameworks that we already have? What is it missing out on? Yeah. So, Frank?
Yeah, I'll answer that one because it's something that we're actually grappling with right now.
Yeah.
I mean, in our perspective and in the building and construction industry, skills is the actual practical ability to carry out the various roles, be it from plumbing, painting, carpentry, etc. It's those practical, tested skills as opposed to the theory on how concrete is mixed and how concrete sets, etc. So it's your talking hands. It's that basic.
Albert?
Very good question. So, to me, of course, on the demand side is exactly what he's expecting. Everyone is talking about what he expects, and if I was an employer, definitely that's what I'll be looking for. But I think we need to go even beyond, because I would like to make sure that if I'm a plumber, not only I know what I have to do practically, but I can also innovate. So I can take some initiative, I can innovate. I need to keep raising my understanding of the trade and be able to participate in any change in terms of improvement. So there are skills that we get from schools, from companies, but there are some level of development that you want to see, because that will definitely inform changes that we would like to see in the supply end. We need to make sure we keep innovating our sectors. And there are a number of ways to do that. I was looking at one of the school, a renowned school in Denmark, where they've managed even to inform the industry in terms of innovations in the sector of carpentry or woodwork. So they've come up with all kinds of ways of minimizing the use of wood, looking at environmental issues, integrating them. So I think that's also an aspect that we need to involve. So skills is also a way that you innovate your sector or your trade.
So,
Well, simply put, skills are the future. And that's really the end of it. I mean, they are the future. But if you want to be a little bit more specific, for me, they are the application of knowledge and understanding through communication, through the development of competency, through the development of behaviours and attitudes that we need to move forward, both for human prosperity and for our own personal development.
Anna?
Just thinking about the basic skills that we need, like we need knowledge that are helping us to put in practice basic skills. We need to communicate first. We need to be adaptable, to adapt to the changes that we have. It's true that we should take into consideration what the job market needs, but we also should think that job market is changing every day. So we need skills that will be applicable also after 1 year, after 2 years, after 5 years, not just today. And I was just listing some skills that for sure we need in our region. We need to communicate, we need to negotiate, we need to be able to apply some vocational skills, some practical skills, as have been said, and we need also to be job creators. We need to have entrepreneurial skills. And this can be gained from a lot of internship programs, and we have the good example of Germany when students can have internships and gain these skills. Also, we should recognize the non-formal education that I think plays a very important role today for the improving education and improving quality of education. And we also should think about the principle of being, like we have knowledge that develops attitudes, that develops behavior. And when we will have responsible behaviors in our society, then it will be much easier to integrate all the knowledge that we have and to develop all the skills that we need for the job market.
Yes, I agree with you. I think behavior and attitude is as critical to this as this. Yeah, exactly. So now I would like the audience to, if you have any questions or comments on what's been being discussed so far, I would invite comments. Yes. Sorry, I saw his hand first. Yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
she's on her way. With the mic.
So the question of change of sustainable behavior, I fully agree. The question of innovation in behavior. See, in medical science, in neurology, very recently we have discovered that the change of attitude depends on the management of neurons in the frontal cortex. Exactly. So, what we are trying to, how to change the behavior? This is a very basic question. How to drive a student to interest. I feel that there should be a sense of primal leadership that should be inculcated among the students. Gentlemen, in this assembly, I want to tell you that unless somebody is motivated from within, let me tell you, any amount of education, any amount of technical education or sermon is not going to change the behavior of individual. This we have, there is a long study carried out in 20 years, and we found that student behavior, even executive behavior, even leader behavior can be changed slowly. So I urge and request, it's a very good issue has been raised, that there should be application of the principles of primary leadership. There are 5 pillars of primary leadership. It starts from self-awareness, then it goes to self-control, then it goes to motivation. All are these stages. If this skill is imparted right from school, I tell you, he will be a very responsible person and he will be attentive to what he does that will enhance his skill. That I mean.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks for the comment. Yes, Paramjit, just behind him.
My name is Paramjit Pabe. I'm the Group Executive Director, Human Resources for a large group in Africa, that's in Nigeria. Just to share some experience in the area of sector skill development. We are a private sector company, and we are one of the largest cement player in the whole of Africa, working in about 14 countries. Apart from the Dangote Academy that we run, which is basically a business imperative to train people for our businesses, we have looked at how could we upscale or upgrade the standards of construction and building skills in Africa, primarily starting from Nigeria, because that's the country we operate out of. We have been in discussions with UNIDO, and we have come up with a project where we are looking at training people in building and construction skills, primarily masonry, tiling, carpentry, plumbing, painting, etc. And the program is to train about 50,000 people a year, and the deliverable is about 250,000 over 5 years. Now the challenge was where to get the funding. UNIDO doesn't fund. They bring in all their expertise, network, strengths, tools, curriculum development, but they don't fund. And when you go to the government, it takes years for funding to come through. So what do? You just give up a good idea, or do you start somewhere? So we decided as a group, fortunately we are financially strong and we have a social obligation which we are very conscious of. So we decided that we would start on our own directly with UNIDO to do a pilot, where we look at about 5,000 people and we look at just about 6 months of time. And we are today doing a pilot project in the area of building and construction skills. Once that is successful, we are very hopeful that we'll rope in industry, which is like-minded cement companies. And thereafter, probably we will go to the government. Although my faith in government is not unshaken, but sadly enough, the way we work in the government is slow, and the private sector is in a hurry to do things and build skills for the future. So that's the way it works.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that example. Behind there, the gentleman who raised his hand. I'm going by the sequence of hands that I've seen, so.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much. Pano Muyingo John Chrysostom is from Uganda, is my name. The issue about skills is very critical today. Almost every country all over the world is talking about skills development, curriculum have been changed. And I think we all agree that the employer, the consumer, has got to be involved. Two things that maybe I want the panel to help me, maybe to share their experience is, first of all, Parker was saying that the private sector, the employer, should take the lead when it comes to formulation of policy, which I don't want to agree, and I want her to convince me why. Because when you, for example, in Uganda, we have changed the curriculum right from primary. We are even doing the same at the university. We have come up with a program that is called specifically for skill development. It's called Skilling Uganda. And the emphasis here is skills. Even if you have gone to school, even if you dropped out of school, and you want to acquire skills, there will be a program for you. That is the informal bit of it. I'm looking at the rate at which the interests of the employer are changing because of the rapidly changing demands. I'm trying to, and I'm trying also to look at the cost that is involved. What is it, to what extent should this employer really be involved in determining the process, the curriculum that has to be followed? To what extent? She said, I think I got her right, that the normal trend has been government has been leading. She's trying to say that the employer should be given a chance to lead. What will happen in a situation like that? One is interested in his profits today. How one to maximize it, doesn't even consider what's going to happen tomorrow, and tomorrow there will be a very big change. Then the other is the cost, especially poor economies like most of African countries. It's very, very, very expensive to change the curriculum. Even just change the curriculum. Implementation is another. How do we go about financing this rapidly changing program? I agree we have no problem, but how do we go about it? I thank you.
So his question is about how do we finance this process of change. Any quick comments on that?
Can I just make a very quick comment on that? I don't think I was advocating that the employers should do all the work by any stretch of the imagination. I think what they need to do is set the strategy and set really the standards that are required. The danger is if you leave it to government and to academics, they'll do exactly what they want to do, and the employers won't get what they want at all. So I think it's finding the balance whereby the employers can actually inform the process, they really lead on the policy and the strategy, and then and the rest actually do what the employers really want them to do. Clearly, yes, universities, other providers, government need to make sure the quality standards are set and they articulate to international standards. But at the end of the day, if the employers don't have some leading role in that policy and strategy, I don't actually think you'll be any further forward with the curriculum for the future.
So we have just one more question that we can take. Yes, he's been raising his hands. Yeah, we're just short of time, so just my request is to make it quick. Yeah.
This is Ajay Shukla. Till recently, I was Vice President and Managing Director for McGraw-Hill Education in India. Very quickly, a best practice and then a question to the panel, and you can. You mentioned IT companies. They find that they have to invest an enormous amount of time in retraining or training for the job. McGraw-Hill Education actually did a project for Wipro, which was spending about 54 man-days before anybody was put on a live project. And we found that the first 10 days of the curriculum was very simple skills, which is business communication, professional, verbal and written communication, logical and analytical reasoning, personal grooming, email communication. So what we did is, because we have relationships with the industry, we brought that curriculum and all the people that Wipro selected in the 7th semester, in the 8th semester, they went through a structured course called Campus to Career. So the cost of upgrading this skill was borne by the institute, while the graduates, when they joined the workforce, they actually fast-tracked, and they were not on a stipend. So in that sense, it solved a problem for many things. And there are specific technical skill modules which we will now bring into the curriculum in the 7th and 8th semester, so that this whole 54 days is not necessary. And the question is that we found great success of this program with private universities because they are more adaptable to the needs of the employer. What about public universities? They seem to just not respond so well.
Albert, I think you can take that question.
It's quite complicated. I don't know if you can say.
I think that's an interesting question to end on in some respects. I mean, that's the cop-out answer. No, I mean, I think this is actually a real problem. And effectively what I was alluding to a moment ago is that universities, particularly in terms of the way in which they accredit and such like, it can take 2, 3, 4 years because they're robust standards and all the rest of it. And whilst I don't decry that, I think, and it's very important, then I do think that it is a big problem. I think maybe through funding regimes in some countries, if universities are publicly funded, maybe then the government may think about shifting the funding in a slightly different way. They've certainly started to do that in the UK. They're only starting to fund public universities in those programs which they feel are important for the future, and that the arts and humanities are getting much less generously funded. That may not be the right way to do it, but I guess there's a whole mechanism here and probably a whole other discussion to have.
So I guess we are out of time. My coordinator here is getting getting blood pressure. So let me just quickly summarize the discussion for us. I think we all, the panel and everybody else here has agreed that the criticality of skills is very high given the labor market requirements today, and that both government and the private sector as well as the youth need to participate in the process of deciding what skills and at what in how it needs to be delivered. I think we also agreed that as much as skills, we need to also stress on attitudes and behaviors in building the future leaders of tomorrow. So thank you so much for your participation, and please join me in thanking the panel for their enlightening this up. Thank you so much.